I appreciate the opportunity working with Debbie and State Board of Accounts and their invitation to be here to present this new piece of legislation dealing with 911 funding and the opportunity that I've had as we look at audits and eligible expenses over the last couple of years since I've been in this position. Bill Borney from the Auditors Association most recently became my right hand and assisted our office in collecting the financial data that your counties had to submit on the 3-year history. And I'd like to thank Bill for spearheading that project and doing that legwork for us. David Bodorf from AIC and Stephanie Yeager from County Commissioners Association, they were heavily involved in this piece of legislation representing your interest, ensuring that local government maintained a seat at the table and their voice or your voice was heard during the General Assembly. And I know Stephanie is here. Stephanie, thank you very much for the work. And I'm not sure if David is here or not. Most importantly, though, I want to thank you for the financials that you sent to us along with the providers over the last few weeks. That was a great deal of information for us to collect, for us to be able to establish a funding model going forward. And for those of you that are in counties that received a letter from me in the last couple of weeks that said you did not submit your certification letter, I take the blame for that. Those certification letters were found in another electronic file. So if you sent me an email back that said, yes, I did send it to you, and I sent it on this date, we were able to find that. And I appreciate you working with us for that. There are probably not enough copies, as Debbie said, of the PowerPoint presentation, but I know that she will ensure that this is put on their website. I'll ask Bill to put this up on your website for you to be able to refer back to. Our contact information is on there, and if you have questions as we work through this transition, please send us an email or call our office and we will try and find the answer for you. The one thing that has become clear is that there are a lot of questions and very few answers, and we need to work through those and process that information so every county in Indiana is treated the same when we give an answer. Important components from today is to understand that the funding stream for 911 is changing dramatically from what you've known it to be since the mid-90s. And it's important to understand the elements of that transition over the next few months as providers have to change the remittance of where they send their revenue. The list of eligible expenses is a very important topic, and we'll talk about that later. The ineligible expenses that you may have in the future and how those are handled today versus how those ineligible expenses will be handled in the future. And then this new piece of legislation is full of auditing requirements and reporting requirements. Senate Enrolled Act 345 passed in the last session, and it deals with 911. It still appears on the state's website under the Enrolled Acts, but the title will be 16.7 once it's codified. And there is a lot of information. If you go to read this online, the first 12 or 13 pages really will only apply to you if you have a communications district that you've developed, and there's only 2 or 3 counties in Indiana that has done that. So if you start around page 13 or 14, those are the very important elements dealing with the 911 funding as you move forward. What we found is that 911 funding is a very, very important topic, and it's important to a lot of different groups of individuals. And as we work through the session this year, there are a lot of individuals, organizations that have a great deal of interest in your money and the operation of your 911 center, or what we call a PSAP, a Public Safety Answering Point. And when you try and get 25 or 30 individuals or groups to reach a consensus dealing with the finances of what you're going to use to operate your PSAP in your county, there were days that it was very trying. What we were able to accomplish with this piece of legislation is, although it's changing the funding model for 911, it's only a starting point. This entire bill sunsets June of 2015, and we have 3 years to gather the financial information that we need to be able to answer some questions for members in the General Assembly. It was important for us to accomplish something this year because, as you all know, your 911 funding from the landline providers has been drastically declining over the last 36 months or so. Landline revenue really became a cash cow back in the mid-90s when dial-up internet was very prominent, and we all rushed out and had a second line put in our homes for our internet connection. All of those connections were paying a 911 fee, and the counties began to see their level of landline revenue increase. Well, as the wireless industry began replacing traditional landline technology, we begin to see that drastic decrease of that revenue. The fee put on wireless devices did not match what you had at the county level on landline, so the revenue was not being offset. Across the country, it was about a 14% loss per year. I know in Wayne County, where I was the 911 director, we were around 18% per year. We were above the national average. Some counties were not that great because they don't have a lot of wireless coverage, so residents there were keeping their landlines, and they did not experience the drastic loss that others were. During the session, as legislators began asking questions of those of us testifying, it became evident that we were not able to answer a lot of their questions. And the very first question they had that came from the Ways and Means was, how much does it cost to operate your PSAP? We could not answer that for, I can comfortably say, all of the counties in Indiana, and it was for a variety of reasons that there's not enough money in your wireline or wireless funds to support your PSAP 100%. So some counties supplement that from the general fund, or if you've enacted a LOIT or a COIT, or if you're using Racino money, or if you had another fund locally that you were raising revenue, that you were supporting that. And that information we did not have. At the county level, you may have had a budget for your 911 center, but part of the personnel cost may have been paid through the sheriff's department's budget, through the jail budget, because they're positioned in the county jail, and the sheriff absorbs that in his budget and his line items. Or the liability insurance is paid for from the commissioner's budget, or the health care cost for the employees. Those were all the dollars that we did not have readily available to us to be able to say that we know that in this county it cost X number of dollars and we're comfortable with that figure. Well, we were there asking for a rate increase, and they had a hesitation about passing a rate increase when we could not say how much we really needed. So we have 3 years to answer these questions for the General Assembly, and you'll find as we go through this presentation today, there's going to be some workload put upon you for information that we will have to collect at the state board level. They ask us what funds were the counties using today, and I've mentioned those, and there's a menu of options at the county level. What should eligible expenses include? What can you use your 911 money on? Keeping in mind that at local government and public safety, we understand what it takes to deliver that service. I've spent my entire life in public safety. I understand that. The other side of the equation is the telephone industry, where these fees are collected. Because that fee is on their bill that their customer is getting, they want to keep that fee as low as they can, and they want to keep the list of eligible expenses very narrowly defined. Their belief has been, and was in the session this year, that you should use 911 funds to allow your citizen or the motoring public to dial 911, your 911 operator to answer the phone and stop. anything from the point of that employee answering that phone to the dispatching of the police, fire, EMS should be paid for from another fund. And that is how they want the eligible expenses defined, and they want it very narrow. Well, from the public safety side, we say you call 911 because you want the police, fire, EMS to respond, and the county has to have the ability to send those services. So we need to be able to use that money for the employee, the equipment, the radio, the trunks, and there is not a lot of an agreement as to where we draw that line in the sand. So this year in the list of eligible expenses that we'll go through, you'll find that some areas were expanded, other areas were narrowly defined, that as we go through the audits, the counties will be held accountable for ensuring that all of your expenditures meet with that list that's in the statute. Today, the way 911 is funded, County Council establishes the line rate for wireline and VoIP services, VoIP being the telephone service over the cable. If you have Vonage or Comcast or Bright House, the County Council sets that rate. And we have 92 rates across the state. They're as low as 30 cents and as high as $3 and some change, depending upon the county in which you reside, and it's based upon a formula in the statute for the size of your county. And those dollars are collected on wireline and VoIP by the provider, and as you know, a check is mailed directly to the county auditor. You receive those funds. This new bill changes that. Wireless today is on the wireless phone bill. The wireless providers collect that 50 cents per month. Each month they send the state treasurer or the state 911 board that revenue, and we distribute that revenue back to the 92 counties. And those are the ACHs that you receive around the second or third business day of the month for 911. That's wireless. Your wireline money and your wireless money is not commingled. It's in separate funds. You have a different list of eligible expenses that you have to adhere to with those funds. This bill changes that. And then prepaid are the minutes, the cards, the devices you can buy at Walmart or Target, or you can buy online from a provider. Today, that is 25 cents per transaction, and the retailer collects that fee. That fee is submitted to the Department of Revenue each month when the retailer pays their sales tax, and then our office sweeps that account each month, and those dollars are distributed to your county today along with your wireless money that you receive. I know very little about this, but this was the information that I received. We've had a lot of questions in regards to establishing the new fund for 911 effective July 1st. You know today that you have a wireline fund and you have a wireless fund, and you're operating budgets out of both of those. Come June 30th, you're going to transfer the cash balances of those two funds into a newly created statewide 911 fund at the county level. Right? You cannot rename the wireless account or the wireline account as the statewide 911 fund account. You have to create that new fund, and you have to transfer those balances. This is the information that you'll need from State Board of Accounts in identifying that fund. It's very important that you do that from the auditing perspective, because the first 6 months of this year will be audited under the old statute with the old list of eligible expenses. July to December will be audited under the new law. We attempted to have this on the calendar year because that's where you all operate, and I was okay with that. But I was told, well, you no longer work for the county, you work for the state, and we do things differently, so we're going to make all the counties change and do things on the state's fiscal year. So you now are transferring those funds. You're going to reduce the budgets in both of those funds and then reappropriate those dollars for that budget out of this new fund to finish the last 6 months of the year. Now, we understand that in doing so, you may receive an invoice in July that was for a service in June, that in June it was an eligible expense, but in July it's not. You will still be able to pay that invoice in July for that service in June, even though it's coming from a different fund, because we know as we start through these and the auditors start looking at questionable expenses, that we're going to have a transition period that we're going to have to work through with revenue coming in and with the bills being paid. So in that July-August time frame, rest assured that if you have that invoice come in, you'll be able to pay that. And we'll know when we look at those questionable expenses that it was in that time frame. All right? So what does this new law do for us in Indiana? Well, it establishes a single statewide 911 fee for all technologies, where today we have the 92 rates for landline. Keeping in mind that we're losing the landlines, Indiana had to decide what funding structure we were going to use to move into the future for a stable funding source for 911. And the starting point was a single statewide fee. We knew we could not take the fee away and tell you to pay for it out of property taxes, with you already being up against the caps. Not every county wanted to enact a public safety LOIT or an expanded public safety LOIT to qualify for the PSAP. So we had to maintain the fee on the bill and set a single statewide rate. And the calculations that we were able to utilize illustrated that 90 cents would work. When we started out, there was talk about 70 cents, 77 cents, $1.25, $2, depending on which agency you represented or organization. Did you want the fee low or did you want the fee high? And we were able to settle through a consensus on the 90 cents. So that will be the fee starting July 1st for all landline connections, home phone, business phone, VoIP lines, 90 cents. And then the prepaid, that is 25 cents today per transaction, will increase to 50 cents. So that brings up the question, well, today my county charges $2.85. And you're going to take our rate from $2.85 to $90. How is that not going to cost us money? Well, we're going to take the Allen counties, the Marion counties, the Vanderburgh, St. Joe, that are paying the 30, 40, 50 cent rate, and they're going to go to 90. So they're going to see a fee increase, while those of you at the $2 and $3 mark will see a fee decrease, and that's landline and VoIP. Everyone will see an increase on wireless from 50 cents to 90 cents. Well, that means that our residents in our county is going to pay more, and we're going to supplement the 911 operation of a rural county. You're right. You are. We have to look at this as a statewide initiative, because today that's the way our network is designed. We operate a statewide network that all wireless 911 is handled on, and in most counties, over 80% of all 911 calls are made from a wireless device and handled on our network. And we do that from a statewide perspective. And that's the way your wireless money is distributed today. The only difference is we will now distribute landline and VoIP monies the same way. And we'll talk about the formula and how that is determined here in a few moments. The other thing this bill does is it allows us to collect fees from all technologies. Obviously, you all know that technology is rapidly changing, and there is new technology on the market that we cannot collect a fee from today. That industry tells us your law does not apply to us because of certain language. This bill gives us the language to cover that in July we can begin addressing some of those VoIP providers that believe they do not have to pay Indiana a 911 fee. That is not a large percentage, but that piece of technology represents a small percentage. But next week, when a new device is on the market and they determine they don't have to pay the 911 fee, we'll continue seeing our revenue eroded away because of the type of technology. That's the basis that the telephone industry has. Get the fee off our phone bill. Collect your money some other way. Technology is changing so fast. Please do not be dependent upon us to collect your fee. In 3 years, when this bill sunsets, we're going to have to be able to make the determination or the recommendation to the General Assembly that A, the fee stays on the phone bill, or B, we have an alternative that is a long-term sustainable funding solution for county government. Today, we cannot answer that. Creates a single list of eligible expenses, and then it adds a significant number of audits and reviews and financial reporting through state government to committees and to the General Assembly. All right. So the information that you submitted to us, the 3-year financial history for wireline revenue, was combined with the wireless revenue that we have because we send you that money, and we averaged those 3 years of revenue to develop a hold harmless level, or the minimum amount of money that your county will receive. We are currently working on that. You should have those numbers back from us the 1st of June, and you will be able to use that figure as you begin working on your budgets for 911 for the next year. Keeping in mind that today you have no idea how much revenue you're going to receive from the telephone companies. All right? At least with this figure, you will understand you will receive no less than that dollar amount that we identify for you. So that is that hold harmless level that you will not drop below. The law will not allow it. So those distributions will be made towards that hold harmless level of funding. All right? The law states that any new revenue that's generated shall be distributed in 2 pots, much like your wireless money is today. 90% of that pot of money will be distributed based on the percentage of population that your county has in the state. And then 10% will be distributed on equal share. Right? That distribution of new money most likely will not happen until the latter part of the fiscal year as we identify how much new revenue is coming in. We originally estimated that this bill would generate approximately $14 million in new money, and that's what was presented to county government. During the session on the last night, that $14 million dropped to $5 million. And that made us a little nervous on that amount of new funding. We're redesigning this, and $5 million is not enough to support the total redesign of this statute. By the end of the evening, crunching the numbers, we came in somewhere around $8 million. We've been told if we do not generate that $14 million in new money, that we can go back to the state budget committee and ask for an increase in the 90-cent fee to make up that difference. We will not know until the revenue starts coming in if we're going to hit that benchmark or not. And the only way we can do that is distribute to you the money that comes in based on the hold harmless and hold back the new revenue until the latter part of that year. Now, if an abundance of cash comes in and it's clear that we're going to meet that, then this new board could authorize a distribution midway through the year of some of that money based on the 90% population, 10% equal share. We won't know, though, until the revenue starts coming in if we can do that. Before I start on eligible expenses, the one thing that I would like to point out is that the one thing I can guarantee you in the months of July and August and September is we are going to experience difficulties in this funding model. And the reason we're going to experience difficulties is providers remit money to you 60 to 90 days in arrear. They are being told that in July, that remittance schedule changes, and instead of sending you the money, the money comes to us. And what we have informed the providers is that any revenue that's collected by them from their customers prior to June 30th, under today's law, that revenue is to be sent to you. You'll deposit it in this new account because you won't receive it until July or maybe August. So that revenue will come to you. I'm sure that we'll have some providers send that revenue to us. As we move forward, I'm sure they're going to send revenue to you that should have came to us. And the only way we're going to be able to identify that is to look at the collection period. Right? And they should file a report with you when they send you that check for what time period that money was collected. If it's prior to June 30th of 12, that's your money. It goes to you. If it's for a time period July 1st and after, that money should have came to the state. Right? We won't know that until we work through that. So in July and August and September, when you'll experience a decrease in your funding level, please don't think the sky is falling. You have our contact information. Call us. We'll work through that on a county-by-county basis to identify those collection periods and monitor that revenue that's coming from the providers to ensure that you get what's rightfully yours. And I know that some of you are chuckling, but that is a mandate of this new board to ensure that any of the revenue that comes to the state is not revenue that should have come directly to the counties prior to July 1st. All right, eligible expenses. I said today you have two lists of eligible expenses, and they are vague at best, some gray area. The one thing that we found a few years ago when the General Assembly mandated a 3-year audit for State Board of Accounts to do is that Indiana did not experience 911 money being spent illegally or a large percentage being spent on readily identified things that were ineligible. You know, sheriffs and 911 directors and council members and commissioners were not taking trips to Hawaii and using 911 money. It didn't exist. And as we worked on a new piece of legislation, there are some who would like members of the General Assembly to believe that you're just spending your money for everything under the sun, when in fact the audits show that you're not. So as we work through this list of eligible expenses, we wanted to ensure that there was still some gray area in some of these that left decision-making at the local level with public safety officials, council, and commissioners. As I've traveled the state, the one thing that I've found is one size doesn't fit all, and that you need that discretion in these areas in making those decisions. And I think that we were able to accomplish that. So the first one, the lease, purchase, or maintenance of communications service equipment. What does that mean? Well, it depends on who you are as to how you read that. You could read that to interpret part of your 911 equipment. You can read that to interpret your radio equipment inside your PSAP. Not radio equipment for a public safety agency, not a portable for a sheriff's deputy, not a mobile radio for a fireman or a city policeman. This would be radio equipment inside the PSAP or a remote transmitter in a far part of your county that they use to contact a first responder. Right? The second one, necessary system hardware, software, and database equipment. That is your 911 equipment. That's what you're paying to a provider, a Frontier, an InDigital, an AT&T, a CenturyLink, to provide your 911 equipment. And they charge you every month for the equipment, the software, the records management, the addressing. You can use your 911 money, obviously, to continue paying for that equipment. Personnel expenses, including wages, benefits, training, and continuing education. Today, there's a period in this bill, obviously there's a comment. It says, but only to the extent reasonably necessary for the provision and maintenance of the state 911 network or your 911 system in your county. This is an area that drew a lot of attention during the session, that if you're using 911 money to pay a county employee, make sure that employee is working in the 911 center. Now, there are some fringes to that. If you have a GIS coordinator that does your addressing, you can use 911 money for addressing, and you could pay a proportionate percentage of your coordinator's salary for doing the 911 work. What the industry was after is that you're not paying the maintenance person who cleans the facility, empties the trash, and that's the only time they're in there, that you're not using 911 money for that. So beginning in July, if you're using it for salaries, make sure that that employee is doing a service inside the PSAP, working for the PSAP. Right? Operational cost, utilities, maintenance, and backup power equipment. If you have a standalone 911 center, you can pay utility bill. You can pay maintenance for that facility. You can pay for the backup power that's provided to that facility out of your 911 money. If your 911 center is located inside the jail or inside a county building where commissioners assign a percentage of the utility bill to each department, you could use 911 money to pay that percentage of your PSAP's share of that utility bill. All right? That's what that is saying. An emergency notification system, an E&S system, trademark name, reverse 911, for example. How many of you in here have counties that have an emergency notification system where, for public safety purposes, they can call your telephone from your PSAP or your emergency management agency? You have that. All right. A lot of counties are looking at that technology. If you have that system and you're going to spend 911 money after July 1st on that system, or to buy an E&S system, you have to have the approval of this new statewide 911 board. The industry pushed for that because they did not want 92 counties running out, buying E&S systems, and then overloading their networks. They originally wanted it taken out, and members of the General Assembly who think that's important wanted it left in there. So this was an agreed upon approach, that there would be some level of checks and balances, that before you spend that money, you have to have the authorization of this new board to make that purchase or spend money on that system. Now, if you have weather sirens, it doesn't say you can spend money on weather sirens, because it says emergency telephone system, right? And there's that distinct difference. And I think a lot of counties are using the telephone systems. Now, if you're going to buy that system and use money from some other fund, the general fund or wherever, you don't need this board's approval. You can just do that on your own, right? And as I've traveled the state, what I've found is there are not a lot of counties running out and buying these systems. So the concern of the industry that you're going to overload their system is not waiting at the door at July 1st to happen. Call logging equipment, it's the recorders in the 911 center that's recording the telephone calls and the radio traffic of your public safety officials. You can use your 911 money for that. Or an IDAX connection. That's the connectivity, the circuit that your PSAP would have back to the Indiana Office of Technology that they are using to run their warrants checks, their sex offender registry checks, their, I started to say 27s and 28s, but that doesn't mean anything to you. License plate and driver license checks that the police officers do, that's that circuit. You can pay your monthly bill with 911 money. Right. This was added, mobile radio equipment for first responders. Right. What this is saying is that 911 money can be used to buy mobile radios for police, fire, EMS officials. So city police, town marshal, city fire, township fire, sheriff's deputy, you can use 911 money for that. Now, I would caution you in that we have spent a number of years telling the General Assembly you don't have enough 911 money to operate 911. And if you take your 911 money to buy radios for first responders, then you're not going to have any more revenue in your 911 fund. And when we continue to say at the local level, I do not have enough money for 911, they're going to look at how much did you use for this purchase. It's legal, you can do it. I would just caution you as you're dealing with council and commissioners against doing that. 50% of the expense related to narrow banding. By December 31st of this year, the FCC has mandated that all radios be narrow banded. And this has been coming for some time. And what we're finding is that a lot of public safety agencies, one, they don't have the money to pay for the narrow banding, or two, especially in the township area, their radios are so old they can't be narrow banded, so they need to be replaced. And they're asking county government to replace their radios because they need to achieve that narrow banding. What this bill says is you can use 911 money after July 1st for that, but you cannot pay 100% of the cost. You can only pay 50% of the cost of that new radio or that narrow banding expense. So if your sheriff's department or 911 center says, hey, I need to narrow band my radios, you can pay 50% of that cost out of 911 after July 1st. And then the last one, or the next to the last, rates associated with communication service providers network. That's what we pay for at the state level for the wireless network that all wireless 911 calls are delivered on. It allows us to pay our bill for that. The last one, bond obligations. You will not find anywhere in this statute any mention about outstanding bond obligations. Are there any counties in here that you floated bonds pledging wireline 911 money to pay for your 911 center? Nobody. That's good. Bonds are not an eligible expense on this list. However, after July 1st, if you had outstanding bonds, you would still be allowed to pay those bond obligations using 911 funds until those bonds are matured. What you cannot do now is obligate any future revenue for any new bonds from 911 money. Right? Two things that was important to some members that were lobbying in the General Assembly to be excluded: bricks and mortar. You cannot build a building and pay with 911 money, and you cannot buy vehicles. Now, trust me, there are many things that are ineligible expenses that are not listed in the statute. But these were two that they wanted specifically mentioned. And the one thing we always seem to hear about is that counties are buying dump trucks and snow plows with 911 money. Now, I don't think that's been found in an audit anywhere, but that's the message that's delivered to members of the General Assembly. And so it was put in there. You know, dump trucks, police cars, sheriff's cars, those kinds of things. Today, if there's a questionable expense or an ineligible expense identified in your audit from the 911 fund, that's noted in State Board of Accounts report. It's handled at the exit conference, and there is not a provision for you to repay that or any penalty associated with that ineligible expense. Under this new bill, if you do buy a dump truck or spend money on an ineligible expense that's identified in a State Board of Accounts audit, or our office becomes aware of through another reporting mechanism, all right, it does carry a penalty at the local level. What will happen from a State Board of Accounts audit, when we receive that, our staff will come to your county, we'll meet with you, the sheriff, the 911 director, the commissioners, whoever, And we will further audit that questionable expense and do a finding of fact of, yes, it's actually an ineligible expense. You bought a widget that you weren't supposed to. Or, no, upon further examination, we found that it was actually eligible, and that finding of fact will go to this 911 board. If the finding of fact is substantiated that you did use money on an ineligible expense, this new board is empowered to require the commissioners to repay the local 911 fund the amount of the ineligible expense. So if you go out and you buy a dump truck and you spend $25,000 and that's verified and the finding of fact substantiates that, this board can require you to repay your local 911 fund. An early version of this bill said you had to send that money to the state, which made no sense to me. So it was rewritten to say that you repay yourself, you have to provide proof, and then it's verified in the subsequent audit by State Board of Accounts. There was a lot of discussion about this new 911 board. Today there's a wireless board that has 3 wireless carrier representatives and 3 911 directors. The state treasurer serves as the chair. And in discussions about a new board and authority, who should have a seat at the table, it was important to local government to have more seats at the table. When local government asked for more seats at the table, the telephone industry wanted more seats at the table. Their position is, as long as that fee is on our phone bill and our customers are paying it, we want to have a say on that board in making determinations about rates and eligible expenses. Through the session, we were able to keep the industry number to 4 seats on the board. It becomes a 13-member board. The rest are government officials. Maintained the 3 911 directors, or the PSAP directors. The state fire marshal was added at the request of the Fire Alliance. The Indiana Sheriff's Association will have a county sheriff appointed, and all of these appointments are by the governor. The sheriff will be on this board, a sheriff who has a PSAP in their facility that they're responsible for. Superintendent of the state police will be on the board. Since we're looking at this from a statewide perspective and it's a public safety issue, they being the leading law enforcement agency in the state, the superintendent was added. Voice over Internet protocol, or the cable industry, will have a seat. The Indiana Association of County Commissioners will have a county commissioner appointed to the board. Indiana Associations of Cities and Towns will have a representative appointed. 2 representatives from the telecommunications industry, 1 representing a large telephone company and 1 representing a small rural telephone company, and then a wireless provider. So the board grows to 13 members, including the treasurer. Today, we're responsible for operating the network, collecting the wireless revenue, distributing that to you, and that's pretty much the extent of what the requirements of our office is. And it changes under this new law. We will not be so heavily focused on technology, but more focused on funding, auditing, and accountability as we have to begin answering questions for the General Assembly. We'll collect all of the revenue to send to the counties. Nothing will come directly to you. Your PSAPs will be required to start submitting call statistic data to us that we're required to submit to the federal government. Today, Indiana does not have a standardized collection method for calls for service in the state. Based upon federal dollars and future grants, we need to be able to collect that data, and your PSAPs will be sending that to us. And then we'll be doing grant administration for any of the future federal grants that are directly related to 911 that requires a single state entity to administer that grant. I mentioned the increase in oversight and auditing. You know, today, State Board of Accounts does your audit, and they do our audit. We have a third-party auditing firm do an audit, and that is the extent. The General Assembly built in these additional steps to push us towards answering the question, how much does it cost to operate a PSAP? What funds are you using to pay for the operation of your PSAP? So State Board of Accounts will continue doing your audit. They'll continue doing our audit. They'll have subsequent reports that they have to file with the State Budget Committee, the Legislative Council, the General Assembly, with that financial information. The Indiana Advisory Committee on Interlocal Governmental Relations is like a 25-member committee made up of senators, representatives, commissioners, council, mayors, small town officials. They are going to do a study between July and November on the structure of 911, the funding mechanism for 911, and file a report with the General Assembly, the Legislative Council, with a recommendation as to what should the future of 911 for funding and requirements of being responsible for look like. During the session, Indiana Associations of Cities and Towns really wanted the General Assembly to structure 911 like the county jail. 100% the responsibility of county government with no financial assistance from municipal. They were not given that, but they were given an intermediate step, and that's this review by this committee to address those issues and make that recommendation. Something that was added to your plate, by January 31st of each year, you'll have to submit a report to us identifying every expenditure that your county made for the operation of 911. And that doesn't mean just from your 911 fund. That means from any other fund that your county is using to fund your PSAP. So you'll have to submit a report to us. I'm confident that we will work with State Board of Accounts and your association to develop that instrument. What would it look like? What information are we trying to obtain? And make it as easy as possible for submission of that financial data. As I stand here today, I can't tell you exactly what that will look like, but we'll know well in advance of January when that first report is due. Consolidation of PSAPs, if your county is still working on consolidation, it's still a mandatory requirement by December 31st of 14 that your county contain no more than 2, unless there would happen to be a university or an airport that has a PSAP. This bill added language that if you do not meet the mandatory consolidation requirements in January of 15, you will not receive a distribution of 911 funds. And that was built in to continue driving the counties that still need to consolidate. All right. That is a lot of information in a short amount of time. You have our contact information. If you have questions, please call me, send me an email. If you send an email to State Board of Accounts, they'll forward that on to me. We'll work together to find those answers. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to working with you through this transition. Thank you very much.